More on the implications of this arrest, I want to turn to James Lewis now. Lewis is a senior vice president at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and previously worked for the U.S. Departments of State and Commerce. And he joins me now from Washington. Mr. Lewis, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
So one analyst likened this arrest to Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg being detained in Japan or Korea at the request of the Chinese government. So how heavy will the ramifications be politically and otherwise?
Well, I think it is a big deal because Huawei is a very well-connected company politically in China. She's a very important person. They have close ties to the security services and to the party. So it wasn't something that was taken lightly, and you have to think that justice has pretty good evidence on her doing something that was probably Iran sanctions or financial, maybe money laundering, to go ahead and take her off an airplane. That's an unusual step.
And you say that the Chinese government could retaliate. What would be an example of that?
Well, the example that you gave of a Facebook executive being detained in Tokyo, China looks like they are going to put the trade talks ahead of their desire to maybe retaliate for this. But, you know, this is a country that recently kidnapped and detained the head of Interpol. He was a Chinese citizen, but if they decide they're going to take action, they would do it, and they would do it in a way maybe to make a trade when it comes to Meng and her appearance in Brooklyn.
Do you have a sense? We heard from the Prime Minister, he was asked if there was any political interference. He said no, there's an independent judiciary, that he was given notice that this arrest could happen a few days in advance. Do you know how all that works? Is there a request from the Americans to arrest someone that may be coming through Canada, and you must act on that request, or how does that play out?
No, it's the same system here in the U.S. as you have in Canada. It's an independent judiciary, and so the Department of Justice probably did not consult with the White House, did not tell people they were going to do this until it was at the last moment. And normally there would be a formal request to the justice counterparts in Canada to make this arrest. It's not a political decision. It's a decision of whether there is sufficient evidence to justify pulling her off the plane. Looks like there was. So advance notice, not that uncommon, but involvement in the decision doesn't happen in Canada, doesn't happen here.
Interesting. Okay, so the Obama administration did indict Chinese personnel on similar charges, but they didn't take the drastic action such as arresting individuals in third countries, in this case Canada, over fear that Beijing would retaliate against U.S. interests in China or in other countries. So why do you think the Trump administration is willing to risk this type of retaliation?
The fear of retaliation is serious, but you might have noticed that about a month ago, the U.S. extradited a Chinese intelligence officer from Belgium for stealing jet engine secrets. So there's been a decision in this administration, and I think it's the right decision, that we need to push back a little harder than we did in the past. China's gotten away with this kind of activity, like flouting sanctions on Iran, for a long time, and the arrest sends the message that if you don't pay attention to sanctions on Iran, it will not be business as usual.
Would you say this is about deterring China or about the continuing U.S. hard line on Iran?
I think it has more to do with Iran. If ZTE and Huawei weren't complicit in some way, and ZTE is the other big Chinese phone company, this wouldn't have happened. So we haven't seen the indictment. There may be something else going on. It's very unusual to do this kind of thing, but it is part of the larger campaign to get countries to toe the line on Iran sanctions.
I want to ask you a little bit more about Canada's role. Some analysts said it wasn't wise for Canada to become an accomplice to the U.S. on this issue, and China has called for the immediate release of the CFO. Diplomatically, what do you make of Canada's move?
Well, I think that Canada is a very close security partner to the U.S., and you all know about the Five Eyes, the five English-speaking countries that cooperate on intelligence, and particularly on signals intelligence. There's deep, deep concern, as you noted in your story, over the vulnerabilities that using Huawei equipment uses. But more importantly, there's been a close partnership on these issues and other security issues. And I think if Canada gets a legitimate request, they will act on it. And it was your courts that made this decision. That would normally be how it works. We make a request. They believe there was compelling evidence. I think that would be the normal course of events in any country. You would then think, am I getting a request that I should act on, particularly from a close partner? If it's a strong case, I think Canada did the right thing.
James Lewis, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
James Lewis of the Center for Strategic and International Studies, joining us from Washington.